as we continue to celebrate them today, I'm going to speak primarily to the graduates this morning, but I think that the truths from Scripture that we're going to talk about apply so much to all of us. So I hope that you all would listen as well. But primarily going to speak to the graduates this morning. And I'm going to, I graduated twice within the past 5 years, had 2 baccalaureates, 2 commencement addresses, and I don't remember a thing anybody said. I know you guys have a lot going on. Both of them are graduating today at 2 o'clock at different schools. So there's a lot going through your heads right now, so I'm going to try to keep this short and to the point. So if you'll listen fast, I'll talk fast. So graduates, you get a lot of advice from many different people at this time of year. You've got mom and dad telling you what you need to do next. You've got friends suggesting what you ought to do. You've got guidance counselors and academic advisors helping you get through things and get things in order so that you don't mess it all up at the last minute. They've got religious leaders challenging them at baccalaureate services, community leaders at their commencement addresses and the graduation ceremonies. Ultimately, though, after all the advice has been given, graduates, it is your life to live, and it's your choice for how you choose to live it. We can try to tell you about it. We can try to inspire you to live life well. We can try to challenge you to make a difference, but no one can do it for you. You have to make your own choices and live with the results. For your parents, this is a unique time that is filled with great excitement, anxiety, and perhaps a little bit of fear. They're wondering what will come of all those prayers that I prayed for you when you were young. Will you embarrass them, or will you make them proud? Will you be safe when you're out on your own? Will you call just to check in, or will you call just when you need some more money for pizza or whatever that might be? So this is understandably an emotional time for parents as well. But this is also an emotional time for graduates. It's a unique time filled with excitement and anxiety and perhaps a little bit of fear as well. Stepping out into the great unknown, taking the next step in your life always brings those kinds of emotions because it forces you to consider the questions that will define your future. Okay, when you're taking this next step, it's going to force you to think about the questions that are going to define your entire future. Questions like, who has God called me to be at this time in my life? Or what has God called me to do in this time in my life? And do I have what it takes? These are questions about identity and purpose and provision, and you won't always have the freedom or time on your hands to think and dream and talk about your answers to those questions. In the grown-up world, life gets kind of crazy, right? It gets a little bit busy sometimes, and you have bills and decisions and appointments, and before you know it, you are just so caught up in life that you forget to think about these questions. You get caught up in life, and there's hardly any time left to dream about the future and what God might be calling you to do, what He might want for your life. But for you graduates, right now in this period, as you are transitioning, you have time to think about these questions. You are able to think and dream about those things while you're standing at the boundary line between the old world that you've known for so long and the new world that's just ahead of you. And in the Old Testament, Israel found themselves in that exact same place. They were at the boundary line between the past and the future. But they didn't get there quickly. As most of you know, in Israel's early history, they were enslaved under the Pharaoh in Egypt for over 400 years. They had taskmasters to obey. They had a quota of demands to meet. They had no freedom, no power, no place, no authority. And I know some of you teenagers are thinking, that sounds just like school. But I think it was a little bit worse for them. But when God finally rescued the children of Israel from that situation, they didn't know who they were or what they were supposed to do with their freedom. See, people had been telling the Israelites what to do and when to do it for 400 years. And they were clueless now that they had to be responsible for themselves. But God was gracious to them about and he instructed who they were to be and what they were to do, and he promised them that they could make it and that they had what it takes. But the people of Israel, as you know, have got tripped up. They still tried to begin answering those questions about identity and purpose and provision in the wrong ways. And as punishment for that, they had to wander in the desert, in the wilderness, for 40 years. They lost sight of who God called them to be and what he called them to do, and they began to doubt that they had what it takes to get to the promised land, to that step in their future. And that's a similar thing to what happens to those students who show up on college campus and they don't know how to respond to their newfound freedom with no one watching over them and no one telling them what to do. A lot of students stay out all night. They waste their money on beer and pizza, and they fail their classes until finally they have no choice but to go back to where they came from, and with a few hours of credits and thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And that sounds a lot like wandering in the wilderness, if you ask me. But just so you know, wandering in the wilderness still happens for us adults today, too, at times. So these questions about purpose and identity and God's provision shouldn't be put off by students or adults because they're important questions for all of us to think about on a regular basis. But finally, Israel found themselves, after wandering for 40 years, they found themselves on the edge of the promised land, where God had been promising the children of Israel to inherit for years and years since Abraham. And they found themselves at the boundary line between their past and their future. All right, there was no question about where they were going, but there were many questions about who they would be and what they would do and if they had what it takes to accomplish the task when they got there. So they paused on the banks of the Jordan River. All right, the Jordan River, and just they could see the promised land, Canaan. And there on the banks of the Jordan River, they listened to Moses deliver a 30-chapter commencement address about answering those questions, and it's now known as the Book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so at the end of that speech, though, Moses, he passed the leadership baton to Joshua, and then Moses passed away. Now, Moses was an incredible leader, okay? So you can imagine that Joshua was probably a bit overwhelmed by the big shoes that he had to fill following in Moses and the expectations that were now on his shoulders. He's about to step into the great unknown, and he's probably feeling some excitement, a little bit of anxiety, and maybe some fear. But God spoke to him while he was at that boundary line before he took that step across into what God had for their future. And I want us to look at what God said to him at that point in the story. So it's in Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. Joshua chapter 1, verses 6 through 9. It says, "Be strong and courageous, for you are the ones who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night so that you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Now, the thing I love about God's Word is that it's so relevant for us today. Even though it was written hundreds of years ago, it's still so relevant. And I just want to point out 3 things from this that we can learn from this passage as you prepare to take this next step and cross the step from the past in your future. So, first of all, you must remember who God has called you to be. You must remember who God has called you to be. Joshua is the one whom God has called to lead the people into the land. That's who he is. All right, he's called to be the leader. That means, just like any sports coaches could attest to, people are going to question his decisions. People are going to question and criticize and second guess the decisions that he's going to make. They're going to say, well, why are we crossing the river here and not there? Why do they get to go across first? Why are we waiting so long? Why are we going so slowly? Right? Everyone has an opinion about everything. So the words that precede Joshua's call to be a leader are be strong and courageous. Right? That's what God starts it off with. And he repeats this over and over, to be strong and courageous. See, Joshua has to stand with strength and courage in order to remember who God has called him to be. Because if he forgets who God called him to be, then he'll probably give up or give in or settle for something less. All right? And the same is true for you. God has called each of you to be the best version of you that you can be. And remembering that requires strength and courage, because there are people, sometimes friends, sometimes even family members, who offer ideas and plans for you that may encourage you to settle for second best, that may encourage you to settle not for what God is calling you to do. When I decided to go into youth ministry, I had many people in my life, people that I worked with or friends that I had, try to convince me to go into a different field where I could make more money. Some people discouraged me from doing youth ministry at all. And some tried to convince me just to do it on the side and get a real job so that I can provide for my family and all that. And to be honest, sometimes I wondered if that was what I was supposed to do, if that was really what I should do. But I'm so thankful for the people that God put in my life, godly people who reminded me of who God had called me to be. And when I would really seek the Lord, He would remind me that is who He called me to be, and that's what He wanted for me. And when you guys cross this boundary, when you're going to have people pulling you in all sorts of directions, trying to give you their opinions and offering you all kinds of opportunities, but just like Joshua, you have to remember who God has called you to be. Second thing is this, that you must remember what God has called you to do. You must remember what God's called you to do. So in verse 7, God tells Joshua to be careful to obey all the law that Moses gave. He says, don't turn from it to the right or to the left. In other words, don't turn away from it and don't compromise on it. All right, at the heart of remembering what God has called you to do is what verse 8 calls the book of the law. That is the Bible, okay? Whatever you do, do not neglect the Word of God. The Bible is full of stories about people struggling and striving to live in obedience and a right relationship to God. It's the book that God uses, according to 2 Timothy, to prepare and equip His people for every good work. There in Joshua chapter 1, verse 8, God tells Joshua to study the book of instruction continually, to meditate on it day and night, and you will be sure to obey everything written in it. So if you're going to remember what God has called you to do when you cross this boundary line, then you need to read the book, to meditate on it, think about it often, and find friends that you can talk about it with. And all of that talking and thinking is aimed at helping you do what it says. Right? James says, be doers of the word, not hearers only. So you talk about it, think about it, and be careful to do everything in it. Because, listen, actually doing what the Bible says, it requires strength and courage, because other people are quick to point out that the Bible is an outdated book, that there's no relevance for us today, it's not reliable, you can't trust it, that it's all, it's lies. I mean, people are quick, especially in the university and college level, people are quick to point that out. And so many Christians go into college and they get their faith challenged, and they don't have a foundation to defend their faith, and they begin to adopt those very same beliefs. And my hope and prayer is that does not happen to you. I hope that your life leading up to this point has given you a spiritual foundation, that you can be confident in what you believe and why you believe it. But you have to be in the Word. But not only reading it, but doing what it says. If you're going to remember what God has called you to do, you're going to have to be in the Bible and let the Bible just transform you from the inside out. And the last thing that I want to suggest to you guys is that you must remember that you have what it takes. Okay, you have what it takes. Joshua had what he needed to be who God called him to be and to do what God called him to do because he wasn't setting out on the journey alone. Okay, he had the people of God by his side. But more importantly than that, he had God on his side. Verse 9, I love this. It says, "Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." I want you guys to know today that you never need to doubt that you have what it takes because God is on your side. And also, never feel like you're alone on this journey because the people of this church are on your side and we are supporting you. But more importantly, God is on your side. He promises to never leave you or forsake you. It says that he will be with you wherever you go. And that's so encouraging, and I hope and pray that you guys will just cling to that, and that will be kind of a motto for you to have for the rest of your lives. So when you cross this boundary line into the future that God has for you, there's going to be times when you feel like giving up. There's going to be times when you don't know what to do. There's going to be times when you're pushed to your breaking point. But don't be afraid and don't be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. Remember who God has called you to be. Remember what God has called you to do, and remember that you have what it takes. I hope and pray that the Lord will use you and lead you in the way that he desires, and that in turn you guys will just be successful wherever he takes you.